Hi, everyone. I'm Nikole Bouchard. I had the pleasure of working with our graduate student, Amanda Golemba. Amanda, I don't know if you want to wave and let everyone know who you are, where you are. Amanda's thesis committee this semester for her thesis titled Killing It was myself, Associate Professor at UW-Milwaukee, Nikole Bouchard, and also Jasmine Benyamin, Associate Professor. I don't know if Jasmine's around and they're a little wave. And then also Eric Hancock, who is a partner at the Kabbalah Washako Architects. Eric, if you want to give a little wave. And so the three of us worked with Amanda this semester. And then today for the discussion, we have Donna, is it Kacmar? Kacmar, sorry, Donna Kacmar joining us from the University of Houston. Donna, FAIA, is a professor at the University of Houston and also an architect at Architecture Works. And then we also have Adam Bastjan, who's an associate principal designer at Kahler Slater in Milwaukee, joining us again, in addition to Kenny's review. Michael Hughes, who's a professor at the American University of Sharjah, all the way on the other side of the world. And then also our department chair, Zell from UW-Milwaukee, joining us. So Amanda, go ahead and take it away. You gotta make sure you unmute yourself.
Hi, that might be helpful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to sharing the work that I've been doing and to get your feedback. Let me share my screen.
Sorry, I should say before too, I also forgot, Amanda asked Monica Thahani, who is an adjunct professor at UW-Milwaukee, to join us, coming in from Chicago, I believe, and then also Associate Professor Kyle Reynolds. So everyone feel free to jump in and join the conversation once Amanda's done.
Great, thank you. For those of you who don't know, my name is Amanda Golemba, and I am a 3-year MArch student at SARUP. And today I would like to talk to you about what is architecture.
Amanda, sorry, real quick, is it possible to make it full screen?
Oh, can you not see it full screen? On mine it is.
Are you sharing your desktop or Adobe Acrobat?
I'm sharing my desktop.
Okay.
If you go to view or window, I think you get
really
full
tiny?
screen. No, if you just want to get rid of the borders, so if you go to view or window, get full screen.
That's about as big as it goes right now.
Yeah, this is Kenny, and I've tested this out, and I haven't been able to go full screen using Zoom for whatever reason. So I think you might be stuck with this view.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Kenny.
Sorry
everyone. What is architecture? Architecture is death and life. Life cannot escape death, nor should it strive to, as only through an ending can a new life and purpose begin. The architectural discipline is equally responsible for acknowledging and actively participating in the life, the death, and the life after death of its creations. Architecture is matter and mattering. Individual and collective dreams, frustrations, hopes, economics, worldviews, experiences, all coalesce to form our built environment. A building's perceived material and immaterial value is fused to both the economic and cultural values of that society. Current American culture values newness and efficiency and understands progress as erasure and replacement. The architectural discipline and general public need new values if we are to progress architecturally. Architecture is a palimpsest. A building serves to memorialize history in its layered accumulation of material and immaterial traces of the past through its scars, blemishes, and accumulation of dirt and grime. The complexity and richness achieved through these layers creates an uncensored authenticity that cannot be designed or fabricated, and therefore should be prized by the architectural discipline. Architecture is memory. Embracing these palimpsest traces of the past serve to reanimate a collective memory in the spirit of a place. Memory is an overlap between a place and a time. Architecture should leverage the juxtaposition of the palimpsest to enhance the depth and richness of memory. Architecture is violence. Architecture is an inherently violent act. It destroys everything in its wake. Land is torn and displaced. Animals are forced to flee their territory. Plants rooted, unable to escape. Human bodies are displaced or forced to alter. The fallacy of a static built object is maintained through ongoing cycles of destruction and recreation. Instead of pretending that this violence doesn't exist, the architectural profession needs to confront this side of our field and leverage it as a creative force. For decades, post-industrial cities throughout the United States are quietly being erased through self-imposed tabula rasa demolition. If considered at all, demolition is touted as the mechanism for removing unsightly blight, promoting safety, and discarding the obsolete and the unwanted. Once deemed unworthy, rarely does a building survive the threat of demolition. In the last decade, the city of Chicago has erased over 13,000 buildings, 225 in just the last 4 months. Not only does this mass erasure eradicate the material and the spatial, but permanently wipes traces of human bodies, values, and history, a complete annulment of event, time, and memory. But why do we feel the need to erase in order to make progress? This project is a design proposal for a traveling exhibition that seeks to change perceptions of the existing city fabric by visualizing patterns of erasure, questioning the resultant implications and effects of that erasure, and proposing an alternative fate. Killing It confronts the inherently violent aspects of architecture and explores that violence through the intentionally jarring, uncomfortable, and absurd analogy of murder. This analogy is a lens through which to trace the violent, intentional, and premature ending and sterilization of the existing built environment. After all, as Bernard Tschumi said, to really appreciate architecture, you may even need to commit a murder. But murder is not just about the events that take place within a building. It is also the material reality of the building itself. Each year, for decades, the city of Chicago has allowed thousands of buildings to be demolished. For example, in 1948, hundreds of buildings were razed, 3,000 graves were relocated, and a tunnel was carved through the existing post office building to create the Congress Street Expressway. 1965, the Chicago Federal Building was demolished. 1963, the Chicago Theological Seminary. 1958, the Faulkner Row House. 1967, the First Regimental Armory. 1968, the Gage Store. 1971, Grand Central Station. 1972, the Stock Exchange. Despite protests, the building still was razed, and tragically, a photographer lost his life while photographing the demolition when a wall collapsed on top of him. 1963, the Martin Barbie residence. 1971, Church of the Covenant. 2008, the Dexter Wirt Building. 1964, Dooley Block Building. 1958, the Grand Opera House. 1960, Henry Babson Residence. 1958, the Kinsley Store. Pieces of the building were removed prior to demolition to be sold and displayed in wealthy homes as art. Despite the demolition of these buildings and countless others around the country, the building is never truly erased. It lives on in photographs, memories, becomes mixed with the dirt on which it stood, and its physical materials are sold as parts, reused in other buildings, or decay in landfills. Despite our best efforts, once a structure is built, it can never be completely erased. The photos that I showed you were of 15 buildings in the city of Chicago that were demolished between the year 1950 and the end of the 1960s. But what about today? The following series of maps show the aggregation of demolition over the last decade in the city of Chicago. As you can see, over the last decade, almost 13,000 buildings have been demolished throughout the city, and no corner has been left untouched. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Chicago, it really is a city comprised of two. The Chicago South Side, with the Englewood neighborhood being highlighted in these photos, is dilapidated and is riddled with vacant lots and buildings that have been left to decay. The North Side, however, is bustling and is seen as much more prominent. In Chicago, there are a series of ordinances in place that provide protection for buildings that have been deemed to be historically significant. In 1995, the City of Chicago completed a decade-long research effort to analyze the historic and architectural importance of all buildings, objects, structures, and sites constructed in the city prior to 1940. A group of 22 surveyors identified approximately 17,000 properties which were considered to have some historic or architectural importance. A color-coded system is used to rank and identify the building's significance. Approximately 10,000 buildings throughout the city are coded red or orange and are considered to have the most value, and therefore theoretically receive a higher level of protection from demolition. After the orange-rated Mercantile Exchange building, seen here, was demolished without any oversight, the city adopted a demolition delay ordinance in 2003 that imposed a 90-day demolition hold while the building is reviewed. This map here shows the location of all of those orange and red buildings. In 2019, 18 red or orange coded buildings had demolition permits requested. After the mandatory 90-day hold and review, 15 of those were granted and the building were ultimately torn down. It seems that even buildings that the city itself deems to be valuable are not even safe from demolition. In addition to individual buildings, the survey also created a series of districts throughout the city that provided an additional level of protection. Lastly, the National Register has also identified districts they deem to be architecturally or historically significant. When we overlay a map showing the last decade of demolition, we clearly see the staggering number of demolitions that are still taking place in areas of the city that are supposedly protected. As you can see, while the protected buildings and districts are spread throughout the city, a vast majority of them are clustered in affluent neighborhoods. This clustering clearly shows a disparity along socioeconomic lines that is biased towards the affluent white neighborhoods located on the north side of the city. With lack of protection, buildings are demolished with less oversight, leading to huge swaths of buildings being razed or left to decay and become blighted. These vacant lots and blighted properties further depreciate the neighborhood, which lead to more erasure. It's a downward spiral. And here I'd like to zoom in on one portion of the city on the north side, which is the affluent neighborhood, to show that no corner of the city is left untouched by this erasure. Our current path has led to a built environment that is becoming more and more uniform and sterile. Much of America has become standardized mixed-use developments, neighborhoods of cookie-cutter homes, and the excessive use of synthetic toxic building materials. A uniform world is a boring one that has little room for creativity or individuality. Once a building is constructed, the building will succumb to one of four eventual fates, all of which are violent acts that are the result of actions or inactions taken by members of the industry and the community. In one scenario, the building becomes a ruin through a process of natural decay that breaks down materials into smaller and smaller pieces. Demolition is the most obviously violent fate a building can succumb to. The decision to demolish a building is rationalized with statements of ensuring public safety or removing blight, but both of these conditions are typically created through systematic socioeconomic prejudice and disparity. Demolition is often less about the material qualities or lifespan of a building, but rather the socioeconomic factors of the neighborhood that creates a situation where demolition is the easy solution. For buildings that are determined to have adequate historical or social value worth preserving, and there's a funding source, the building will be historically preserved. In this scenario, traces of history and accumulated scars and blemishes will be buffed out, and the building will be returned to a previous time, as if years or decades of events and life had never existed. Lastly, a building can be adaptively reused to transform the existing building for a new one. Similar to historic preservation, this process often removes scars or blemishes to create a shiny new building. Of these four fates, historic preservation and adaptive reuse are the only options that extend the usable life of a building. However, adaptive reuse is the viable option that authentically preserves history and memory while also allowing for radical creative freedom. These next few slides compare and contrast several local and global adaptive reuse historic preservation projects that I was researching throughout this last year. On the left, you see images of Grand Central Station in Detroit. The building was left dilapidated for years, and a company has now come in and decided to historically preserve the building and bring it back in time, as if these years of decay had never occurred. On the right, you see a building that has been adaptively reused by Architecten de Wilderving TLU. In this project, the building was partially demolished already when the architect stepped in and continued the process of dismantling to produce an authentic space that really highlighted the material qualities and the history of that building. On the left, here in Milwaukee, you see images of the Pabst Brewery District, which again had been left to decay over time. Now it's a central hub for breweries and hotels. Even UWM has a few buildings there. And again, traces of history have been wiped away and portions of it have become a shiny new campus. On the right is a project by Heatherwick Studio, in which they took existing grain silos and radically sliced and carved them to produce these really fantastical spaces that still maintain the inherent qualities and authenticity of the building. On the left, a case that we all know well is the Notre Dame Cathedral. The images on the bottom left-hand corner show some of the proposals for how they can recreate the spire that had burned down. However, the French government has decided to historically preserve the building. It'll be interesting to see which portion of history they decide to revert the building back to, as it has already undergone several different iterations of adaptive reuse throughout the years. On the right is a project by David Chipperfield Architects. This building had been damaged by bombing from World War II. And instead of erasing traces of that rich history, the architect decided to really highlight those material qualities and use it as a juxtaposition with the new. Our current path has led to a built environment that is becoming more and more uniform and sterile. If everything is uniform and there are no irritants, then the world is a very boring utilitarian place that has no room for creativity. We are trying so hard to control our built environment that we are wiping away its potential. A new path is needed that embraces the palimpsest created by time, a path that is more authentic. This thesis has really been a culmination of research that has been building over the last 3 years through various courses in adaptive reuse and material afterlives, as well as through personal projects. Rather than choosing an existing building to design a singular hypothetical project that is more typical of a design thesis, I decided to design a traveling exhibition that embodies these issues I've been interested in so that they can be disseminated to a wider audience. This semester began with a series of study models and digital collages that investigate adaptive reuse intervention strategies. As I previously discussed, over the life of a building, scarring, moments in time, and decay layer to create an inhabitable palimpsest of memory. This traveling exhibition is infused with the palimpsest concept by investigating strategies of layering, modularity, flexibility, transparency, and building remains, and layering them together to form a system that operates as an inhabitable core model collage. Each individual exhibition simultaneously memorializes the violence that happened at that particular site and implements murderous adaptive reuse strategies through collage and salvage material to expose what could have been. The flexible layered system allows for the exhibition to be displayed at numerous potential sites. This thesis proposal investigates 3 of those potential sites: a gallery within an existing building awaiting demolition, or at a demolition site. The exhibition utilizes art shipping crates, scaffolding, and building remains as layers that can be displayed individually or layered together. Art shipping crates are used in the art industry to transport valuable paintings, sculptures, and other art. Constructed out of dimensional lumber and plywood, each shipping crate is specifically designed to transport a unique piece of art. These everyday objects that are used by art museums and galleries throughout the world are an untapped resource. When not in use, the crates are sitting in storage or are discarded. By partnering with local museums and galleries, these crates are easily obtained for the exhibition and utilize this resource that is laying around but not transporting art. Throughout the exhibition, the crates contain and display building remains and inform the viewer of the scope of construction and demolition waste through images and data. The second layer of the exhibition utilizes an essential construction and deconstruction tool, scaffolding. This modular system is incredibly flexible, a common industry resource, and is easy to assemble and disassemble. In the exhibition, the scaffolding simultaneously recreates the volume of the former building and also provides the opportunity to deform space to propose an adaptive reuse strategy that could have been implemented instead of demolition. The scaffolding will be obtained by partnering with a local scaffolding manufacturer or contractor who will loan the scaffolding for the exhibition. Finally, rubble and building remains are incorporated into the exhibition to make the viewer aware of the material costs and losses of the demolition. This material is obtained from either that demolition site or collected from other sites throughout the city. The rubble overflows from crates, piles and corners, and rests on scaffolding platforms. All of these layers are combined to create a ghostly recreation of the former building and propose what could have been. 3 sites that I've investigated for this thesis are a post-demolition vacant parcel, a building slated for demolition, and an art gallery. The vacant parcel site option emphasizes the ghosting of the former building that once lived on the site. On display for the general public, this option invites passersby to interact with the exhibition and re-experience the memory of the building. Inside a building slated for demolition, the scaffolding weaves in and out of rooms to emphasize the spatial qualities of the building that will soon be gone. Strewn throughout the exhibition are panels that display the building's history, crates, and rubble. Together, the exhibition tells the story of a building that will soon be erased and invites the viewer to reflect and experience the space one last time. The most typical exhibition space is a gallery. This exhibition site focuses less on one distinct demolition and more on the collective and pervasive problem. In the center of the gallery, a scaffolding structure is erected and invites the viewer to inhabit a space that exemplifies how no building typology is immune from the threat of erasure. Collections of historic and personal photography is displayed throughout the gallery to indicate the sheer quantity of buildings that have been demolished. Now, for this thesis project, I've decided to play out this exhibition concept at one particular site that is very near and dear to my heart. Milwaukee is a city very much like Chicago. It's heavily segregated and also experiences this problem of tabula rasa erasure. The site is located south of the Central Business District in a neighborhood called Walker's Point. Off of the beaten path, the site sits to the left of railroad tracks and is surrounded by restaurants and event spaces. Built in the early 1900s, this building has lived many lives through numerous uses as a storage facility, manufacturing office, and a home. I studied this building for an adaptive reuse studio and proposed a radical redesign of the existing building that celebrates the traces of its history. Sadly, 3 months after the final review, the building was gone. All that remains is a portion of the western wall. The rest has been removed and replaced by a paved parking lot. This exhibition serves to recreate the volume of the former building and propose a vision for how it could have been transformed. This is a site plan. This is a floor plan of the former building. And as you can see, it was a simple rectangle that contained only a few structural columns. The first floor of the exhibition leads you along a path where you climb around debris, encounter strange spaces, and are withheld from experiencing the full exhibition until the very end. You enter the building and encounter a field of scaffolding. On the surrounding panels are images of buildings that have been demolished across the city. In the corners are crates full of debris that have been collected from demolition sites throughout Milwaukee. You crunch across dirt that was displaced when a nearby building was constructed. As you round the corner, the space constricts and the scaffolding tightens. Draped across spaces are images of demolition that have been so enlarged that they become textures. Shadows cast from the scaffolding and panels convey ephemeral memories of the past. A staircase leads you nowhere, a trace of what was erased. As you pass through the constricting scaffolding, a panel describes the history of the former building. Upon exiting the scaffolding, you come to a vast open space that is bounded by the only remaining portion of the existing building. Shadows cross over the parking lot lines that now cover the site, a blurring of past memories and the present. The outer wall of the exhibition is a palimpsest of layers of scaffolding, panels, images, and debris. As you venture further into the exhibition, you see platforms that display crates and rubble. As you approach the staircase, you closely encounter the wall of the former building. In the bricks, you see scars, blemishes, and physical traces of the building's past. Components of the exhibition continue to layer upon one another, deepening the palimpsest. Sheer fabric creates ghostly views into the exhibition entrance as you pass by. As you ascend the staircase, you pass by more rubble. And as you move sectionally, you begin to view the exhibition in its entirety. You see layers of rubble and panels and scaffolding. Looking below you, you see further traces of these patterns. Elements collage together to produce abstract images. Looking from the top, you see these layers that build upon themselves to build this palimpsest. As you approach the end of the exhibition, you see below into where you started. And finally, as you turn back around at the exhibition, you see it in its entirety for the first time. Layers of scaffolding, images, rubble, and crates form a palimpsest of memory. Once the exhibition has lived its life, it too must die. The wood becomes urban furniture. The art shipping crates become urban furniture and are dispersed throughout the city. Benches in parks, tables in school buildings, vertical gardens provide greenery. The scaffolding gets returned to the manufacturer to continue its life process of building and deconstructing the city around it. The rubble that was exhibited throughout the exhibition is crumbled and becomes new building material. And finally, the posters that have been exhibited throughout the exhibition are scattered across the city to schools and museums to further communicate the gravity of the demolition. Once the exhibition is gone and dismantled, again, the site returns to what it formerly has become. If we continue down our current path, we will only continue to make the same mistakes and achieve the same monotonous sterilizing results we currently see in everyday American cities and suburbs. We need to embrace a new path that values authenticity, celebrates the scars and traces of the past, and carries memories into the future. By reimagining what death can mean and addressing cycles of violence, this thesis proposes an optimistic vision for the future of American cities. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda. So similar to Kenny's presentation, love to open it up to any thoughts, feedback, observations, etc., from the guest critics and anyone else in the Zoom audience.
I can start. This is Donna. Thank you to Amanda. I think it was very, it's very provocative to use the, murder and killing and the kind of violence of building, and building is kind of a violent act. Like the first thing we do is destroy in order to build something new. I'm wondering if you're trying to protect buildings or if you're trying to change what we value.
I'm trying to do both. I think that we can achieve both protecting buildings and also changing what we value through adaptive reuse. But we need to allow ourselves to be more creative in how we utilize adaptive reuse strategies. But I think there's a really great hybrid between preserving what is currently there while also like radically altering space.
Yeah, and I think, I love the inquiry into the buildings that have been demolished. I think it might be interesting to change its value to not just buildings, but square feet of buildings, right? How much space? What is the change in economic value when that happens? And what is the embodied energy that we've lost? We did a project, it was a library project, and one of our first things was to calculate the embodied energy in the various building components to help the owner figure out how to value things, not based on a monetary, but on other scales of value. And so I think bringing some of that into this would be really useful. Again, feeding on, Kenny's, you've got 10 years, right, to let this sit in your brain and
percolate,
move forward. I also like the kind of scale of, going from ruin to demolish to preservation to adaptive reuse. I would slide in there this idea of maintenance and also the smaller scale adaptability of buildings.
Yes.
That happens also on that continuum. And your exhibit is, I think, again, that has to strengthen which side it's on. Again, how is it changing cultural values, and how is it encouraging adaptive reuse, which is, I think, what you're interested in, because the exhibit has a generality to it, but adaptive reuse is about a specific building and its specific issues that can be, reworked, and what does it have to offer, and what is its value. I was just focusing on the exhibit design itself. I think the idea of scaffolding is really a beautiful idea, and I would encourage you to focus on that and its ability to define space, define structure, provide all the horizontal surfaces, all the vertical surfaces, ascension and descension, and even places for the images of the buildings, the images, the posters, that I don't think you need the crates. I would get rid of those and I would have them all be integrated. The scaffolding has a connection to this idea of maintenance of our buildings, preservation of our buildings, and it is so entwined to it. So I think focusing on the design potential of that system, because it is so important to the thing that you're trying to do, right? Adaptive reuse, scaffolding would show up at some point, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think heightening the power of that might be useful in design. Plus, it would just be easier, right? You just got one system. You know? Right. Yeah. Well, great. Yeah. Thanks. And I was at that the News Museum in Berlin a couple years ago by David. So it was beautiful, and that idea of the effective time. You know, Kenny mentioned that in his project. You know, the kind of tempo, but the impact of time. And I don't know if you've read the book on weathering by David Leatherbarrow, but it talks about that, about how we should allow time to finish buildings, and seeing this as the adaptive reuse is a part of the continuum, and how it affects the kind of economic pieces, the tax base, what's the impact that it can have. So I think these are all really important pieces that can be added to the exhibit data set.
I absolutely agree. And I think all of those have been part of my whole thinking around the exhibition and this issue in general, and has affected how I see the world, really. But maybe it could have been a little bit more explicitly showcased.
Well, I think those data sets help to change value. So it's not just money, it's long-term money, short-term money, embodied energy, embodied carbon, all of the aspects. Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Amanda, this is Adam. First off, like I did for Kenny, congratulations. You just, finished, what, 2/3 of your thesis presentation and all of your verbal presentation. It's a huge moment for you, and you should be very proud of what you did. You showed us a lot of really great things, and they're very thought-provoking too. So congratulations on that. Building off a little bit of what Donna said, I actually wonder. So first off, I guess I'll say, I had some expectations coming into this, just looking at your 2 pages of your thesis, or in the thesis booklet, and I think you sort of set me in a completely different path, which I actually like the way that you went here. I thought this was going to be a little bit more of a traditional historic preservation thesis project that many people have done, that really takes a building and preserves it and provides a different use to it, and maybe showcases some of those scars that you talked about to preserve some of the history. And yeah, it's a great project, but it's not really a thesis, I guess, in my mind. A thesis takes a stance at something, and you're definitely doing that by doing more of an exhibit and really trying to create some of the emotions that happen within the building after the building is actually gone. I guess one of the questions I have is, so the site that you chose, the one that we're looking at on the screen right now, this was a project that you worked on previously. Yeah. So you chose this because you had that experience with it, right?
Yes, the demolition of this building really personally affected me and kind of started me on this investigative journey into the larger problem.
Yes, and then okay, and that's good. I think that it's nice to have a historical connection yourself to it. And when you did that, were you in the building? Was the building still around when you did that previous project?
It was. I was never able to gain access into the interior, but I photographed the exterior and documented.
Okay. I guess my thought here is, while I also like the scaffolding idea that you created, and I appreciate Donna's comment about how that can become very spatial and how you wove people through it and started to incorporate some artifacts from the building within it. I wonder if you ever thought about using the actual building as it was essentially being demolished. Like, was there a scenario in here where you you almost take a stance of working with a demolition company or you know, I mean, it's a thesis project, right? You do what you want to do, and money aside and timing aside and all that, you find something that you could really decompose. You know it's going to be decomposed. You can't fight that. It's going to be demolished. Can you work with it a little bit more? Can you incorporate more of the actual building, those actual experiences that happen? Because I think what you're touching on, and I love the fact that you talked about the building scars and the link to the past. And you know, the big one that's always been in my mind is that the Notre Dame Cathedral and all of those proposals that happen there, they completely blow away the huge scar that happened with the fire. And I always thought that that's now a huge piece of that building and a huge part of its history, its long history, and probably one of the most important ones in its long history there too. So how can you showcase those scars more? How can you keep them? How can you make them be a part of it to help people understand that it's more than just a building, that this structure has been a series of experiences for people for a very long time, and the importance of those experiences and reflecting on those experiences can live a lot longer than the people that inhabited at that one time. But to do that, you really have to have some of those experiences, I think, or some of those artifacts, as opposed to just putting, you know, the photos of it or boards that you make, of actually incorporating more. So I just wonder if there was an opportunity to think about maybe doing your installation or your traveling exhibit part of the demolition process, as opposed to once everything is wiped away and then you're recreating it again, and how maybe things might have transformed a little bit more, and also maybe how that could connect people more with the building itself and with some of those experiences to hopefully get at what you're trying to do, which is to make this not happen on the next building.
Right. No, I really appreciate all of those comments, and actually the ultimate goal and dream of the site option, that where the exhibition is inside of a building that's slated for demolition, is really with that goal in mind. And so if I would be able to, I would love to work with the company that is demolishing that building and put the installation into the structure, and then have the building be demolished around it, so that this ghosting and this tracing of the scaffolding remains, and that this bits of debris becomes embedded and adds its own layering, and really the experience of demolition to the exhibition.
And the inherent danger that exists with that, right? I mean, that gets back to your I mean, we don't want to go as far as murder, but you know, there's some opportunities to showcase what the demolition actually does to a building and the firsthand experiences of that, and how maybe you know, maybe it's not scaffolding, or maybe it is, but with a protective, you know, surround to it, that you can actually be a part of that process and see how devastating that actually is too. And I think that's great. I think I agree with you now that I do remember that one. Maybe I wish that was the one that you investigated even more.
You know, that came to
where that could lead you.
Yeah, that spark of inspiration for that site. I was like, oh, I could tear the building down around it. Came a little too late in the process of the thesis in order to fully actualize it to a point of presentation. But that definitely was something I considered and would love to do as the next genesis of this.
I talked in the first project, in Kinney's project, about this kind of dichotomy between being a nice architect and a sincere architect, which it seems like you are, and you seem to have a real passion for this subject matter. And the danger of approaching these serious issues in a sort of timid manner. And I think you've fallen into that trap, to be quite honest.
Okay.
The project as an exhibit of an ideal condition or an idea, it mediates the space between the tactility and the visceral nature of the ruin or the demolished building, the materiality of that building, and the visitor, right? In and of itself, you've kind of sanctified, in a way, the materials, you've curated those materials, and you've, through even the gridding and the kind of framing of those parts and pieces, made them digestible in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Normative.
Mm-hmm.
It's like other things would be exhibited in the gallery. In this case, I think its most extreme example is when you suggest that the posters announcing the exhibit are going to then be distributed to a school or a series of schools around the city, right? And if you just dig into that a little bit, I think we begin to unravel pretty quickly. The idea that a poster for a past event is going to have any sort of material impact on a group of children, right, that likely did not engage that event in the first place, it seems really stretching believability, right?
Sure.
And in terms of a thesis, right, it raises the stakes even further. And the thesis is historically often the place where the most outrageous proposals take place and spawn a career of engagement. Right? So I think you have an opportunity to kind of reflect on this when it's over and decide, is this the trajectory that you want to engage in the long term? Or are there latent opportunities within the thesis that can help you redirect or identify alternative pathways moving forward? So there's a fair amount of work both in this kind of liminal space between art, performance art, and architecture. Historical precedent, I'm sure you're familiar with Gordon Maddock Clark, who is also operating with buildings soon to be demolished, right? But doing so in a truly radical and visceral way, right? An immediate way.
I immediately thought of that, Michael. Great for bringing it up.
Where the project that he's working on, you could argue that there is a thing, like a physical thing that he's doing, obviously, cutting holes in buildings. But the outcome of the project is the photographs of that exercise and the writing, the memory really of the exercise. Right? So that's one, you could say, maybe even Rachel Whiteley and her casting of buildings and spaces as kind of ghost-like memories of a pre-existing condition. Right? It would be a similar trajectory. There are a number of architecture faculty, in fact, in and around Detroit and Buffalo, New York. Buffalo in particular, Frank Fantuzzi and Mehrdad Hadighi taught there in the late 90s and early 2000s, doing a series of these kind of projects where they were operating on and in semi-abandoned buildings. There's a history of students at Buffalo being able to go out and buy a building, a house for $2,000 that was effectively derelict, and doing essentially a full-scale project. So I'm not sure what the financial situation and building costs are of a building like the one on the screen now in Milwaukee. It may be that they're more precious than the ones in Buffalo were 20 years ago. But my point is sort of more fundamental, right? In a project like you're proposing, which is essentially exhibiting or celebrating the latent potential within what we collectively treat as refuse, how best to make that, to construct that memory in a way that will live beyond the scope of the exhibition. Right? So it could be that you approach it in the terms of the exhibition itself, right? So some years ago, 15 years ago, my wife and I were living in Colorado, and we made a special weekend trip to Manhattan to see Christo's Gates project, right? Which lasted for 3 weeks or something, I can't remember. But there was an investment, both of time and money, to make that trip there to see an ephemeral installation, right? And so you can imagine something similar here, where you're out of these parts and pieces, making something that adds up to more than the sum of those parts. And to be quite blunt, I think your mechanism of the scaffolding did the opposite. It took the sort of summation of those parts and pieces and made them smaller than their actual weight or value. Right? It's by subdividing it into that grid you never actually get an image or an experience like the one on the screen, where we see either the scale or the weight or the gravity of the actual pile of bricks in the foreground of the image. Nor do we get the sense of palimpsest that you're describing in a real and first stage level. It was always a recreation of that palimpsest within your exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
So my point here is not to suggest one path or another, nor is it to discount your enthusiasm for the subject matter, but rather to perhaps provoke you to be more radical in your selection of that path forward. And right now, it seems like you're tiptoeing around a series of possibilities, none of which in the presentation as it currently exists fully capture or live up to your own enthusiasm for the subject matter.
No, I appreciate those comments. And I think that the process of going through thesis in general has really been more about achieving a state of how I now see the world of architecture. And so that really for me has been like the culmination of thesis and why it was such like a struggle and also
it is for many
really
people,
beneficial. Huh?
Yeah. I think that's what thesis is for a lot of people. And I think the important question ultimately is not the thesis itself, but what you do with that thesis, right? So for a lot of folks, it's kind of tragically the end of their critical and theoretical career, and they descend into the bowels of anonymous acronym-laden firms, producing the kind of generic stuff that you were railing against in the early slides. And for others, even if the thing itself, the product, the drawings in this case, or the models of the thesis, might not be in and of themselves memorable, it could, and this is the potential I think you have before you, be the kind of fuel that drives a series of subsequent investigations. Right?
I agree. Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. A lot to think about.
Amanda, I wanted to talk a little bit about two things that were brought up by Michael and Donna, and they both have to do with people and visitor. So Michael mentioned the visitor, and you started the presentation talking about the public needing to change values. And so people were at the kind of forefront of your premise that you set up, and it seems like they are absent throughout the remainder of the architecture part of the project. So nowhere do we actually see people, nowhere do we actually kind of understand the real experience of the visitor. And I know you have perspectives of that, but I think about a couple of things. One is this notion of labor. And when Donna was talking about maintenance and square footage kind of data points, I was thinking about labor. The things that you're proposing are very labor intensive, as is demolition in and of itself. And so I wonder if that's another opportunity, kind of layer in a new data point as to how these things get constructed. What's the time frame? What's the people power behind this? So all of a sudden people become a kind of agency within the project. And then also even your own experience of the building being on the exterior only, and thinking about what you want to memorialize, notwithstanding what Michael has kind of just said, but like thinking about, in some sense, in this particular building, like seeing the interior is actually irrelevant to anyone because no one ever got to see it in the first place. And so somehow when you're inside of a building, it's the exterior that you're thinking about, or its context in the city that is the palimpsest, not the interior itself. So I think there's an actual flip of context or content that you might want to think about as well. And then the last thing I'll end before I know Monica wants to jump in is thinking about that experience as a visitor and having done a number of studios with the Chipstone. And one of the things we talk about in particular is like getting people to interact with exhibitions in a way. So when you're in a museum, you don't know what you can, or you usually can't touch anything, but the Chipstone does projects where you can touch things, and it's very difficult for them to get museum goers to actually touch anything. So I know that some of the proposals that you're making are not necessarily in a museum, but thinking about what is exhibition and what is not exhibition. So if I bring some rocks in and throw them on the ground, Is that now part of the exhibition? Can I move the rocks around? So just sort of thinking about where the user, where the user starts and stops in these experiences, I think would be another possibility.
Oh, that's interesting to consider in the next iterations of this, and how someone can have more agency as they move throughout the exhibition and construct. Thank you.
Hey Amanda, I'm going to echo on something what Mo just mentioned, and I was going to ask you, because you mentioned that the memory, it's the overlap of a place and time, and you didn't mention a human there. I don't think that memory can exist without a human. So I have to agree with Mo that the human aspect, which has been removed from your presentation, as much as I really appreciate and really like your thesis, and it touches upon a lot of issues, but somehow I've never seen a human factor there, right? So the architecture would not exist without the human. We experience it. So how, and that's okay, that could be one approach. So my question would be, do you take this project as a memory of a building, as something like preserving the cultural heritage, right? Is this the only thing you are doing? Or, is it something you preserving the memories of places or kind of things which happened there, right? So then coming back to your exhibition, I wonder if there is a way to, reconstructing things, one thing, but maybe bringing some photographies with some kind of activities in a building to make them alive, make them believable, make them filled with, those real memories of people, right, who have been there. Another thing to your thesis is, and then I think you cover a lot of things, but now is it, you were showing a map of Chicago and the building which are proposed to be demolished or were demolished. I would be curious to see this in relation of the building being built at the same time. So kind of the balance of removed versus built. Right?
Sure, I have done some research on that.
Because I think it's very valuable, because now we're talking about, okay, do we before we demolish, do we build first, or what happens first, right? We have to build we have to demolish to build something new, right? Is it really necessary to use all the resources? Yes, are we talking about also the concern of the environment, right? So I'm kind of missing the aspect, because okay, for us buildings, we exactly know where they come from, but for somebody who will be viewing your exhibition, I think would be more profound or almost meaningful when you show the materiality of it, or the materials and resources, everything, the source where all these things are coming from. And we know that our earth is being really depleted. If there's a great movie, I don't know if you've seen this, the Anthropocene, the human epoch.
Oh, I've not seen it, but it's on my list.
Anthropocene is the kind of the geological epoch which it's defined by the human intervention impact on the environment, and it shows the different areas of mining, or just degrading earth in every aspect of it, and how all these materials being extracted, of course, for obvious use and purpose. So I think this brings.
Oh, sorry, I hate to interrupt, but we have 30 seconds. We need to close out.
Okay.
Start the next one.
Okay. I'm saying it would be worth to see it and bring some aspect of this that, really to build, it takes a lot of this energy embedded, yeah, right? Donna mentioned, and kind of, introduce another layer of degradation to it, right?
Yes, yeah. No, that's a good suggestion. I will watch it tomorrow while I'm doing nothing.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Thank you so much.